Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our latest in the Casual Stroll Through Middle Earth series. We took a break for a while doing all of the Before the Shadow stuff. We had a couple of great streams featuring Cardalon, Swanfleet, as well as just kind of a history tour through Eriador in particular, going through all the major seats of Cardalon, or seats of Arnor. But now we're back to our regularly scheduled program, going through the regions of Rovanian that we have not yet explored. So, for those of you that are new or unfamiliar with the stream, my name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and uh, I'm a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings Online. Wow, it's been a holiday season, so pardon me if I trip over my tongue a little bit here. Um, so this is a world design focused stream. I'm going to be talking about the process of building the world, building the landscapes, how that intersects with working with the Tolkien's IPs, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits. I will not be answering questions regarding game systems, um, things like lag, things like loot, things like raids, mechanics, those sorts of things. Those just are not an area that I'm well versed in and that I shouldn't be answering questions in. So if you have questions on those, I'd recommend reaching out on the message boards to see if you can talk with someone there who has the answers for you. But I am certainly very happy to answer questions regarding the landscape of Middle Earth, which is something that I've been working on for almost the entirety of Lord of the Rings Online, starting before it launched, and with a small break in between, but yeah, this has been most of my career. So it's really awesome to be able to jump in and show you all what we've built and kind of how we built it. Um, I think Dale is one of these areas that also doesn't really have much for behind the scenes stuff. So we're just gonna be full on Dale. This is actually also one of the regions that was built when I was kind of off doing other things, project management wise and whatnot. So some of this will be an exploration stream for me as well, because while I've played through these areas, I don't know them quite as well as some of the other places that I have built. So let's uncloak myself, and let's get on a horse. Let's see if I even have a horse. Uh, all right, we'll get on my goat. All right. So before I get started, this is actually a little spot that I found that I don't think we really send you too much in terms of content here. This is one of those places where we've got it, blocked off for future development. We haven't built anything there yet, and I don't really think content ends up sending you down here. So this is kind of a little view that you wouldn't normally see unless you're kind of exploring off the beaten path. And that's one of the things I actually appreciate about Dale is there are spaces like this, and it's something that um, when we think about building new regions, it's something that we're kind of putting more thought and emphasis on now, from the world design perspective, is places that players can go that aren't necessarily as full of content as some of our earlier regions might have been. I think there's a lot of value in allowing players to have these spaces where they can explore, spaces where they can just kind of be without feeling like they have the pressure to quest, the pressure to fight. They can just explore at their own pace and see things, and not feel like the weight of the epic story is approaching them as they go through it. Um, so with that in mind, let's start our tour. So right now we're taking a view of Long Lake with Lake Town in the distance, and also Esgaroth Old, the original location of Lake Town before Smaug was shot down and destroyed it. So we will take our way here. Now, Dale does border up against Aaron Lasgalen, Northern Mirkwood. And where the boundary is between those regions is a little fuzzy. I was going to do a little bit of a tour through here, through the elf village that's down here, um, and this is where um, Bilbo and the dwarves, came out on their barrel ride from Felagoth in The Hobbit. But we'll save these areas over here to the west for when we do our northern Mirkwood casual stroll. Um, so in the meantime, let's go through the marshes. Let's go check out the big bad skeleton of Smaug, and just kind of enjoy a stroll through the Dale Lands. Uh, so go through some content real quick too, or questions real quick too. Stars and Rangers says beautiful area, can't wait to see it. Yeah, like I really, this was one of the like happy surprises to me when I came back to working on Lord of the Rings, because while I wasn't working on it, I also was not really putting a lot of effort into keeping up with it. So I hadn't played the area. But when I came back to working on Lotro, I was like, all right, I'm gonna like level up through and see everything I missed, and see it from the ground view, basically. Not just pop into my tools and check it out. I want to see what it looks like as a player, and I was always just very pleasantly surprised and happy to get into Dale. You kind of get this breath of fresh air after being in the oppressive areas of northern Mirkwood. So you get in these wide open beautiful spaces, and it's always just nice to have that kind of cadence of like, you're playing through these intense areas and having it just open up to something that's a little bit more, I don't even know if friendly is the right word, but it is a little bit more peaceful. Whether or not the enemies within would say that things are peaceful right now. So I'm probably going to fall off my horse. Yep. Um, and honestly, like, these are some of my favorite like new scene assets that we got here. The rushes, they just they're great for space filler. They're great for impassables if we need them. And let me just, no, not mounted combat. Who wants to play with mounted combat? Collections. And drag this here so that I have access to it. There we go. So Druid's Fire says, "You and your rock obscured gates." Yes, we do. We do love our rock obscured gates uh, for when we are trying to tease at the future, but not necessarily show it all off. I think there's a lot of value in having those sorts of gates too, because while we are not afraid to just be like, and now all of a sudden there's a pass here where there wasn't one before. And I think that's just kind of the like gamey nature of building something like this, where if we're constantly evolving the landscape, having those sorts of things just pop up happens. But if there are things where we can have a little bit of foresight, thinking about, oh, we might be able to build this in the future, having those gates there, I think goes a long way towards helping the world feel more like, we have a plan for it. Um, Even if that plan means that a place like Minhiriath, for example, isn't something that's going to happen for a very long time. Cute little cottage. I really do like, and we'll look at this more when we get into Lake Town, and there's a lot to look at in Lake Town, but I really do like the look and feel of the buildings, both in Lake Town and in Dale. I think they do a great job of feeling familiar, but also unique to these locations, and they're big points of interests. So it's, I think, really important that they at least have a little bit of something special to them. Um, that does remind me. Once I get talking, it's very hard for me to stop sometimes. So if you haven't seen me have a drink of water in a while, please let me know so I can stop to have a drink of water. So yeah, Lake Town, I find this whole city very impressive. It's got a lot going on with it visually, and there's a lot of like up and down. Um, in here, there's a lot. You know, you can get underneath the core of it into the kind of like seedy underpinnings of the town. Like I think the designers that built this did a really great job of keeping this space, you know, navigatable but also varied. You know, I think it can, any big town can be overwhelming if it's your first time kind of being in here and if it's a very complex sort of space. Um, and so I think there's a lot going on in this space, but I think that the design of it makes it fairly easy to navigate. You know, I think the only thing that I might say that this could use a little bit more of are these like ramps up out of the water, um, because there are spots where you can like fall in, you know, and not be able to get out. There's a good amount of them kind of in the interior, but I think the exterior of here could use a little bit more. But otherwise, I think this is a great little town. There's a lot of just like, yeah, there's just a lot of variety to it, and I like it. It feels great, especially coming in underneath here. You know, I think having watched uh, Arcane lately, which the animation in it is beautiful, but you know there's a lot of emphasis in kind of like the Undercity in there, and I feel like that kind of experience is very similar, where there is, you know, you have your, you know, your major upper city, but then there's still something, there's a layer underneath and below it, and I think Lake Town does that very well. So Aminar says Lake Town style housing would be popular. Yes, it would be. I think the nice thing about housing is we try to make sure that we have a variety of different settings that would be interesting to people. Um, and you know, like I've said before, our focus and goal for our next neighborhood, at the very least, our next neighborhood, if not additional ones after that, is to try to represent the other cultures that, you know, have been kind of neglected. Like we have Bree housing, we have Rohan housing. So those are three kind of human centric neighborhoods. You know, Dwarf has Thorin's Hall and Erebor, but hobbits and elves don't have a second option for housing. So with our next housing update, we do want to do something that is not dwarf and not human, um, so that we can have some interesting variety and options there. Um, uh, Product Via says, "Was Lothorian housing ever a thought?" Um, so I think when we come to building the elf another elf focused neighborhood, we do have a couple of options as far as like styles that we can go with the build. You know, there's we could do something out of Rivendell, we could do something out of Lothlorien, we could take a look at, you know, what's happening in Felgoth and see if there's some sort of neighborhood experience that could be made out of that. So I think that those areas all have interesting potential to them, and some have their own challenges. Like, you know, Lothorian's architecture is very round with lots of gazebos and lots of kind of open to the air spaces. And that is a challenge for building something like housing because we haven't really built, we have our yards, um, and we haven't really built much for interiors outside of custom spaces for um, for Lothorian interiors, at least ones that feel like they're good for they feel good for like a Lothorian kind of feel. So I think Lothorian housing in particular would be somewhat challenging to come up with. Stars and Rangers says, are there any challenges other than access ramps that come with structures on water? So honestly, one of the biggest challenges that come with structures on water is um, even if there is the ramp, it's always knowing what depth the ramp or the asset is that allows players to be able to jump up or walk up to get out of the water. We don't have the option of like mantling, which is like pulling yourself up over, a fence or a rock or something. That's not a feature of the engine. It's not something, it's not a feature of, our characters. So whenever we have something where players in water are in water and we want them to get out of the water, it can be a little tricky knowing how deep down into the water the asset has to be um, in order to um, allow players to get out of it. One of the other challenges with things like water is how pathing is handled. Like different player types, models, humans, elves, dwarves, bjornings, hobbits, like different versions of characters will swim at different depths. So that was something that was challenging in Swanfleet because we wanted the wade water to be completely wadeable regardless of what race you were on, and that was a little tricky. And I don't know if I managed to get it all right. Um, I'm not sure if I managed to get all of wade water completely wadeable by all character races, but it's something that can be very tricky because like there were actually a couple, we whenever we have travel routes, for example, that go across water, if that water is just a little bit too deep, all of a sudden you're dismounted, or your hobbit and dwarf are dismounted but your elves, bjornings, and men are fine. So that's like, I think, one of the trickiest things about um, building building in water is just knowing at what depths certain things can happen, and knowing in our tools when we're making something of the right or wrong depths. So let's scroll down. We'll take a pause here and look at this lovely courtyard while answering a few more questions. But first, I'll have a drink. All right. Druid's Fire says, so there are elves and hobbits left that haven't gotten premium housing. You could tease us by saying Bilbo has lived in a place built by members of his people, and it would be true for both. But that would be a troll. Am, am I a troll? I don't know that I'm a troll. Primix says, it's interesting to watch how the design of cities has evolved over time, confronting places like Bree, Edoras, and now Dale. Yeah, and I think that's something that every time we build something new like this, we learn something a little bit more. For a very long time, Bree was our like major populated city. It was the place that was the like big go-to hub for everything. Um, and part of that was because Eriador, like Bree is it. Like that's it. Like Bree is the city. Um, and as we started getting into these other lands with other peoples in them, that's when we kind of had to to figure out how to build cities better and more interesting. I think like I think we took a lot of what we learned with Dale and with building Minas Tirith. So when we did the Midsummer version of Minas Tirith, there's a lot of things there that we did knowing how well building Minas Tirith went, knowing how well building you know Dale and Lake Town went. So trying to find ways to make the cities feel fuller and more lively, but at a lower performance cost. We know Minas Tirith still isn't exactly where we would want it to be in terms of performance, but it's something where you look at Midsummer and there's a lot in there that is all because of things that we've learned from building out these places, and we're looking forward to taking everything we've learned from all of that and applying it to wherever we're going next, which I'm not going to say where we're going next, but so Oni Smash says, would love Yondershire housing. I spent an inordinate amount of time questing through the Yondershire just because I didn't want to move on. And I think that both the Yondershire and the Shire kind of have that sort of experience for players. Like there are a lot of people that love to call the Shire home, even if they don't have a house there specifically, but they love calling the Shire home, and I think there's something just about hobbits in general that is very very homey. They're homebodies for the most part, with the exception of the main characters that we followed through the books. But and sorry, I'm just enjoying the view as we're walking around. So I think that adding additional housing to the Shire is something that in the future we're not opposed to. Um, it's actually something that when we were building the Yondershire, we were thinking about that as a possible feature for the Yondershire. But we ended up kind of like scoping back a little bit so that we could focus a little bit more on just making the Yondershire itself, a great Shire-like experience, and also to kind of focus our attentions on building, Gundabad. Um, or no, when did things come out? No, focus our attentions. Yeah, I actually don't remember now. But anyways, sorry, brain fart. Going through some more questions. Kaifir says, would it be possible to make some of those cottages on landscape homes for us? Maybe we wouldn't be able to customize the lawn, but we could customize our own instance versions of interiors. Could be a way to avoid building entire neighborhoods and getting a single homestead in an obscure and get a single homestead in an obscure location. So there have been some games out there that do have, um, public housing spaces. Asheron's Call had, which the housing system for Lord of the Rings is for LOTRO is based fairly heavily on. It did have public housing. I think for us and for performance reasons, housing is probably going to stay focused on instances, just so that we're not causing any undue stress on other playable spaces. But the thing that I think is an interesting idea to me, and I started it a little bit in prototype space, and you can see that if you've ever played Bull Roar, we have the player estate, which is kind of my test neighborhood for ideas um, that I have when I think of new housing stuff. Um, and the player estate is really kind of the idea I had was like, I mean, it's one house right now, but the idea was thinking like, well, maybe we could test this out and see how the concept of a single home neighborhood works. What sorts of things? What are the pros and cons to it? What are the challenges of it? Um, what we can do to make it work from a performance perspective, and also to test whether or not there are any weirdnesses and complications with players walking into a housing space on instance 0 instead of within a neighborhood instance. So there are a lot of things going in there that um, that are my kind of like ideation spaces. And there's actually a couple of things that I've recently put in there that will not entirely be functional for next time we do like a borer or something, but they're ideas that may grow into new features down the road. Viril says Lindleby has a lock gate that looks like it must lead to a housing area or a raid. I could be keeping my deep claw raid up there. You never know. Um, me, I do like to hide the giant deep claws everywhere. Iwanar says the design of Dale was restricted in some ways by earlier partial versions of the instances, wasn't it? So for those of you that weren't familiar, um, what came first in the creation of Dale was around the time the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies came out. We produced a series of instances kind of telling the story of Dale um, through, I think it was 3 different instances. And we'll go check out those spaces a little bit later as we progress through here. Um, and I think there were aspects of it that when Dale was built were taken into consideration. I don't know how, and again, some of this happened. Um, I was present and was there for the building of some of these Erebor cluster instance spaces. I built I think it's the survival one where you're running along the road to escape. Um, and then, the creation of this region, I think the biggest complication was moving um, moving the work we had previously done somewhere so that these spaces could be built. Um, because I think we kind of vaguely position these in and about where they should be. Um, and I know for a fact that Dale's assets, the buildings and whatnot. I'm pretty sure, at least at the time that we were building them, they may have gotten polished up because um, I think at around this time, after I wrapped up my instance, I moved on to work on Infinite Crisis pre-production. So I don't know the final form that all of this stuff took, but I'm fairly sure that a lot of the assets in the original instances were, kind of Breland assets that might have gotten dressed up a little bit more. And then, I think there was a degree of conceit of like, oh, well, hey, Dale got burnt, so we can rebuild it in a way that we want to. Ponton Finberry says, one of the things I like about Dale here is the faint, many-colored stones as you walk through town. It's very nice. Yeah, I like that there's a good degree of color variation here. It's not, and even if you look like, the buildings, they are darker, browns and grays and whatnot, but there is variation in the colors. You get your color pops in the banners, and even the stone walls just have a little bit of variety to them, which I think helps that a lot. Uh, Product Via says, and again, I also apologize if I pronounce anyone's names incorrectly as I'm going through here. Any thoughts on removing a house per account and move it to a house on another turn, as in every toon can have its own house? Um, I I'm not sure about that. I think that is a that is more of an engineering issue that would need to be responded to, and not something I can specifically answer. All right, so we're slowly working our way towards Erebor. Um, we make our way across the ford here. We're approaching areas too where it's like, and granted, this area specifically isn't that, but like when we that were previously blocked off and then we open it up. So for example, like doing the tour of Ironfold, you can get into Ironfold from Dale, and taking down those walls was just always like it's satisfying to do it. It's satisfying to see a space where we kind of like planned for something to go in there and then be able to like knock down the walls and actually go in. It feels good. I have a drink. Little Redhead. So this is gonna harken back to the water stuff. Little Redhead 42 says, um, "I think it's great when our hobbits get dismounted and the elves don't. Adds to the realism and it's amusing." Yeah. So there's that's when you're building a game. There's always that kind of struggle of immersion versus playability, and from a world building standpoint, and a narrative standpoint, it totally makes sense to me, and I appreciate that kind of thought is there. But in a traversal sense, there's this idea that, okay, this does this makes the game a little bit more frustrating for me because I chose to play as a hobbit as opposed to an elf, or as opposed to Bjorning, or I chose to play a dwarf instead of a man. Like it it, it can add a little bit of frustration to the experience, and whether or not that's good or bad, like I don't think it happens often enough that it's problematic, but it is something to take into mind and keep in mind when building these kinds of spaces. All right, I'm going back down through, and reading some of the comments and trying to make my way back to Dale so we can take the road up through, and eventually get to Erebor, maybe go to Raven Hill. Um, regarding the one house per character thing, Iwanar says one house per character would be more load on the servers, and we already fighting lag problems. That's the reason for premium housing. I think they want people to pay extra for the extra load on the server. I certainly think there's some of that in concept. The idea of the cost and expense of having additional housing being offset in some way. Um, I do have a request in to, at least for the original neighborhoods, because this is an issue with premium neighborhoods. But right now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with housing, the original free to play housing neighborhoods, the elf, dwarf, human, and hobbit ones, um, those all uh, those all are only one per account. So you kind of have to pick which one of those you want. And I do have a request in to kind of open that up. So it's like the first one is a normal one, but after that, if you want to buy multiples, it can be like a mithril purchase sort of thing. Um, so I feel like that's probably like a balance there. And I know there are some people that love those original neighborhoods and would love to have more of them instead of having to have multiple accounts. So hopefully something like that can be the solution. Now Refine says Dale has more invisible walls than many other towns. Players did tend to get stuck in the canals during testing. Did players tend to get stuck in canals during testing, or is there some law in Dale that prohibits swimming in them? So again, not having been here for the design and implementation of it, I can't speak to the specific reasons why the designers had set things up like that. My guess is by and large, Dale is a fairly physically complex space, and the thought with those walls being there was just to try to simplify it, ironclad it, protect people from, you know, having having stuck spot experiences. Basically, I do agree that sometimes those sorts of things can be a little frustrating. I personally like unless it's a like exterior region impassable, I do my best to make sure that um, there's as much passability as possible. Um, I know I frustrate people with my impassables around landscape spaces, but I think like if we can in general do our best to um, make things passable where it feels like it makes sense for them to be passable, we should try to do that. We haven't gone in and kind of reevaluated Dale or anything, and I'm not sure if that's something that's really on our on our to-do list, but it's certainly something that when I see stuff like that, I kind of think about and try to figure out like what are the purposes and the reasons behind it. So now we're doing a quick tour through Erebor. This is another one of the things that I had built after coming back on to working on Lord of the Rings. Everyone else was building, Grey Mountains and building Ironfold, and I was working on all of the instance and interior spaces. So I'm while doing this, I'm going to. Oh, I wanted to go this way. Don't mind me. I'm lost in my own space. Um, so I know there are a lot of people that like to participate in concerts and whatnot, and I know Weathertop is a thing that is a space that players love to go to. For anyone organizing events, it would completely tickle my heart if someone would host something here in the Dwarfium. All right, another drink and then some more questions. So Eros216 says, would you consider making the inns in the original Shire more like the ones in the Yonder Shire? And that is definitely something that we had thought about doing. It was a stretch goal kind of thing. The designer who did the Yonder Shire that did the Yonder Shire taverns was really interested in going back through and revisiting all those taverns as well. The tricky thing with those is, a lot of those do have a good amount of nostalgia tied to them. So we wanted to make sure um, when we do get around to doing it that we maybe don't go as all out on them like the Yondershire ones, but at the very least try to find ways to update them so that they look and feel better, but they also do not step on the nostalgia that people might have in those spaces. So let's see if I can get to. So we're gonna go to. Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna ride the horse. I'm gonna spend more time trying to figure out what the location is. I'll just ride. So yeah, that's kind of I think where we're thinking with those inns and taverns. I think the Yondershire inns and taverns definitely did set a bar for us because they look great, and the two that we added into um, the Storvales with Before the Shadow, we took a similar approach to building them like that as well, and I think it looks great. There's another revamp of another beloved space that is coming up, uh, maybe for update 35. I think that's where we're shooting for it. That it looks great, but it is not in the Shire. So that's your teaser. Um, so Osirian, or Asuran and the Little Redhead are both talking about apartment style um, housing. That was something that I was like tinkering with the idea of a little bit in Breetown too. There's a section of Breetown that's kind of sectioned off and was something that I was like, oh well, these could be like apartment houses, smaller like little one-off things. Maybe they don't have a yard, but that sort of thing. But I have other fish to fry for housing before I do something like that. Um, and I'm also not entirely sure how much value there is in something like that. As something that I'd have to like think about to figure out a little bit more of. Um, all right. So Mr. Rosh says, "Guys, how do you deal with so many skills? Aren't there too many buttons to push?" So that's a game systems question. I think that is a better question suited for our class designers and a game system team than I. But thank you for asking a question. I do encourage people to ask world design focused questions during this the stream because that's more than likely what I'm going to be able to answer for you. So Kemoshi says, I can see something similar happening here to capitalize on the Amazon series and then rebuilding back from whatever space or instance was created. So I think with Rings of Power having come out, what we did with Before the Shadow was kind of a nod towards the awareness that Rings of Power was set in the Second Age, or Second Age, well, set in the past. So we've tried to leverage some of that concept in what we were building. The content surrounding Karis Gelibrin, particularly the skirmish and the forging of the ring, like those are all things that have an association with the sorts of themes that were being explored in the Rings of Power as well. I think the biggest difference being is where I feel like Rings of Power might have been striving to kind of uh, have a fresh take on the narrative. I think we focus more on kind of retelling the scenes of the story as they were available to us. Um, let's see. Fuzul Hani says, I assume you are not designing all housing interiors like in Minas Tirith or in Herne, for example, or Mead Hall interiors. Do you have a journey world designer or trainees that do that kind of thing on your team? So our world design team right now is a fairly senior team. I think our team is probably on average comprised of the most experienced people on the team. There are many people on the team who've been here for a very long time and have been working on this for a very long time. So there's a lot of great institutional knowledge there. But our team, we're all fairly senior, and we all kind of do a little bit of everything. We don't really feel like any specific world design task is beneath us and something that we should farm out. Don't mind me. I'm just gonna rocket launch myself up here while I was on my goat. That was kind of entertaining. So I don't think that building those interiors is really anything that we look at as something that we roll our eyes at when it comes to building it. It's something that we need to do, and honestly, like building those sorts of things sometimes is a nice break from whatever else we might be building. Building instances, building instance spaces, particularly very specific controlled spaces, can be like a mentally exhausting kind of thing. So having those little like one-off interiors where we can be like, I'm going to take a day to build a tavern, like that's kind of fun and a little bit of a reward for us, when we're needing a break from whatever larger tasks we're working on. So we'll go up here. It's not the right time of year for it, but we're gonna see if we can find any thrushes. Good old side door. So I think this basically kind of concludes the landscape portion of our run around. You get a view of arid Mithrin off over here, which is an area that was previously like blocked off that we opened up. I don't remember exactly what the view was like before. Um, I don't have that historical play experience or development experience, but it's all like I said. It's always fun to um, pop open the landscape and add in a new path somewhere, whether or not we had pre-planned it or not. Uh, So let's find a perch here. So there are a bunch of different interior spaces that I want to get through, but I do want to just like go right through some questions, so that I'm not feeling like I'm getting too far behind. So Zico Z says, "Where do you get your ideas from housing from? Are you looking at what players say or what players say on the forums and Reddit? Are you in touch with the guy running Deco du Milieu website?" So um, there's a lot of different directions that housing inspiration comes from, for decorations and whatnot. And I'm going to be building out a bunch more, I think, for update 35. I tend to look at whatever we're releasing as far as a major content update, or um, for whatever our neighborhood is. Like Erebor, I did a ton of dwarf focused decorations. For new features and whatnot, it's kind of like, okay, we're building a new neighborhood. This is a good opportunity for us to play around with some new features. What's something that we haven't done before? So, for example, with the Rohan neighborhoods, the new features were the movable light sources. Movable light sources, fire pits, and and columns. The columns were less of a success. The new feature that I'm working on playing with now is custom fencing. So in the next new neighborhood that we release, you'll have the ability to change what the property fences around your house look like. We also have a thread on the message boards where players can go through and put down their suggestions for in-game assets that should be turned into housing stuff. So if there are items, decorations, and whatnot, that sort of thing. Kiefer says, "Will we ever be able to own multiple homes, if not one per toon?" So you can already own multiple homes. You can only have one per account of the base free to play houses, and then you can have any number of premium houses that you want. Um, do, do, do. Uh, so there's a question about whether or not I collaborate any with Yao on Deco du Milieu, and I do occasionally chime in on the Discord there, and I do participate in some of the housing contests that they do by offering up scenarios choice, for of the candidates that come up through the contest. Um, let's keep scrolling. Um, let's see. Can we get more connections between regions, like the Cardalon Shire portal, for example, Aaron Lasgolin to Arid Mithrin, for example, or After Battle Gondor to Losanark? So we tend to do those connections where there makes where there is specific reasons for it. Um, Not to say that we don't necessarily want to do that. I think with Cardalon Shire Connection, it just kind of was meant to be like a fun little nod to like you're going into the Shire now kind of thing. Even though South Farthing is not something that was introduced as part of this update. Um, I think this year will introduce some additional connections to the world through through new landscape and expanding off of existing landscapes that will hopefully be satisfying and will hopefully show um, show how the world can grow based off of the setting, the period of time that it's in. Um, So, Kaifir says, do you think Erebor could ever get its own unique texture? At present, it feels a little underwhelming when compared to something like Grey Mountains or Gundabad, especially considering Erebor is the kingdom of the dwarves in Third Age. So I think, the intent with building Erebor was as a collaboration of a number of different existing types to kind of show that it was all coming together. Whether or not that entirely works, I leave that to you for you to judge. Will you guys ever connect the day file to Mordor opening so we can change the sky in central and eastern Gondor? Um, so current Gondor, as you're playing through it, like all of our regions are sort of time locked. So the period of time that you are playing your content and quest in there, it's kind of the period of time that that region will stay. That doesn't preclude us from doing things like versions of those regions that happen at different times, at different ages. Like what we did with Azanul Bazaar and Dimril Dale. Like they're the same location, but Azanul Bazaar occurs in the past, so it gets a different day file treatment, that sort of thing. Guerenda says, please don't change the Burden Baby so much that it cannot be used for gatherings. Landreval has hobbit dances there. Like I said, I think we want to be cautious about any updates we make to those existing spaces because we do want to make sure that they're things that can be um, used well in the future. So let's go here. So this is this is one of the Dale spaces. Again, things might be a little funky because I'm not in the actual instance. So we're looking at this as we're running through. There may be things that are broken or busted. You'll note that this landscape north of, is supposed to be situated north of Dale, doesn't exactly look like it does um, in the actual game. And that's because we built this before and then kind of had to assess how we had built it, how we had built um, these instances, and then had to kind of adjust our plans a little bit for things like Dale. But this was a fun, like, small little instance space to build. One of the things that as I was like kind of doing research for this stuff, Dale is supposed to be visible in the distance here, but I think a lot of the assets are set to only appear on a specific instance layer, so that's why they're not there. Let's see, going down through. Do you happen to know if there's a new producer's letter coming anytime soon from Aegis Leverage? So, new producer's letter, I believe it's in the works. I don't know exactly when it is planned to be released, but I'm sure that when information on it is available, it will be shared out there so that everyone can know when to expect it. That's more of a Cordovan or Severlin question than a Matt question. Um, how do you approach a setting with so many heights, rivers all the way up to mountains? Is there a design philosophy you begin with, or does it vary from area to area? Um, so, I think we can set the water heights at various levels, however we see fit. Um, and as we're building, we kind of sculpt the landscape first and then look for areas in that landscape where we can put the water and might have to flatten some things out a little bit here and there to make it work. But that's generally kind of our approach is landscape first and then make the water fit. We do know where certain areas are supposed to have rivers and whatnot, so we might like paint down reminders for it for ourselves. But otherwise, it's usually we sculpt first, and then we make the rivers fit um, into whatever it is that we're building. All right. Chickens are unable to use the portal from the Shire to Sarn Ford. Was this because there's a flag on the portals needed to set them to allow session players to use them? Avid chicken players would love to be able to use this portal and enter Gundabad, among other places blocked to chickens. Um, I think I'm not sure if there needs what there needs to be set uh, for specific um, portals and whatnot for chickens. Certainly, you could make requests for things like that. If oh, I can't sit in that chair. All right, well, I'm just going to sit on the floor then while I finish up these questions. That's certainly something that could be requested. You might need to go onto the message boards and campaign for it, um, but it's would be probably a very small change. But I couldn't say specifically. I'm not super familiar with the session play stuff. Um, is Harlenden, Forlenden areas in plans? Are you planning to save it for some expansion? We don't have any specific plans for either of those regions right now. Let's see. So I'm going to try to speed through these. I actually have a meeting very, very shortly that I'll need to hop off to, talking about art for our next expansion pack. So that's exciting. So, are there any chance of increasing speed of regular mounts to be the same as war steeds? That's a game system thing, so I won't be able to answer that as well. But thank you for asking. The funeral bonfire offered during is the best at throwing off light, which can drastically change the looks of the environment. However, smoke tends to wreck the view of the great ambience you have provided. I was wondering if you could use something like crystals, like in Felgoth, to cast the same amount of lumens without the smoke. I'm assuming this is for housing items, um, but I'm not certain, so I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Will you ever revamp Dol Amroth? I love your guys' work and everything, but that. I realize you weren't part of the team at that portion. I'm not sure what our specific plan, if we have any specific plans for Dol Amroth in the near future, but um, I remember playing through the city, and some of those bigger cities can be a little confusing to work your way through. Um, so, question: is there any reason why some of the water in the game isn't as textured as it used to be? I'm thinking Nenharn. It used to have the same waves and such as Evendem, but now it's just flat. Was this intentional? I'm not sure. Um, that may be at some point someone wanted to change it to put the water flow stuff on it, and then never actually got around to it. That's a possibility. Um, So, are you saying that the real world was justified to fit the former released instances, or were the instances designed with this upcoming expansion in mind? So, this is again talking about the Dale stuff. Um, so, I believe the instances were designed first, and then Dale itself was built. The Dale lands when they were built, what was built for those with those instances was taken into consideration when sculpting the landscape for the actual version of it. Inafir says, "Hi, I'm a new player. I'm a newer player. Scenarios World Design single-handedly got me into Lotro after seeing the YouTube, and I already subbed for the year." Well, thank you. We're glad that you appreciate the world of Lord of the Rings. We're super excited to be building it, and we're happy to keep building it, and hope to continue to keep pushing the visuals of the landscape as we continue to grow the game. All right. So, how is the work on Soft Edge for Waters going? So, one of our lead tech artists, took a look at that, and he actually figured out where the issue was. So, hopefully, within a few updates, I'm not sure exactly what update, but the Soft Edge on Waters should be coming back. We just need to do some testing to make sure it's all working. So with that, I think this concludes our casual stroll through the Dalelands, which was a bit more casual and a bit less harried because I was on the mount the whole time. So it went a little bit slower. So I hopefully won't get too too harangued about the Casual Stroll runs at speed 19,000. But anyways, thank you everyone for coming here, hanging out for the hour, taking a stroll through Dale with me, and asking your questions. Our next stream is, we're going off of a poll that I sent out a while ago. So our next stream will be sometime in January. I'm not sure exactly when. Holiday seasons, it's a little hard to figure things out. In the meantime, the Yuletide Festival is up and running on our live worlds. I think we're in a patch time now, and once that patch is opened up, you'll be able to get back in and to continue playing the Yule Festival. So I hope everyone's having fun with that and enjoying, a little bit of the lovely winter scenery up there. So yeah, in the meantime, I hope everyone has a great week, has a great holiday season, and we'll catch you all on the next stream. Have a great afternoon, everyone.